And welcome everyone to Sports Talk Line, where we talk sports 24/7, 365. And on today's episode of Battle for the Big East, we're going to be talking about the Seton Hall Pirates with Timmy Bess, aka Timmy Ice from the Igloo. Timmy, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. I mean, other than obviously the debacle that happened in Milwaukee yesterday, that got me pretty heated. Thankfully I took enough time to kind of just, sit back and, review the entire game rather than just react to the final abysmal 1.8 seconds. But I mean, I'm doing all right now. And, it's been good watching the entire Big East, do really well for the most part. And, but obviously it's going to be a long week off because Seton Hall, Providence still has COVID. They won't play them Tuesday night. And, they got a week now to prepare for that back-to-back and home against St. John's.
Yep. So you kind of mentioned it yesterday. The Marquette Seton Hall game at Marquette, there was a controversial finish, to say the least. There were several controversial finishes in college basketball over this weekend. Basically, Bryce Aiken was called for a foul. Marquette hits one of two, and then there was, I guess, poor referee mechanics would be the way to describe it, to say the least, at Marquette. But how do you think, going after that game with Marquette, because it was back and forth. Also, Seton Hall had a tough loss at DePaul. They gave up 96 at DePaul. They almost came back and got that game. But how do you think after this whole week, because they beat UConn the week before, Kadary Richmond had a coming out party where they just ran the street ball, offense, give them the ball, get them out of the way for a little bit. How do you rate Seton Hall's season right now, with all the ups and downs and that going on?
If I'm a professor and I'm giving a report card, I would probably, before COVID, I would put him at an A. But with the recent slide, I'd probably bump him down to a B+, because I would say, losing to Providence and Villanova with only really 7 guys, and also without Ike Obiagu and Tyrese Samuel, got to give a little bit of leeway with that. And they were tight with Providence and Villanova in both of those games. And then you bring Ike back against Butler and they dominate, and you see that missing aspect when Ike came back. This is a 7-2 monster down low. And against Marquette, he recorded his 25th straight game with a block shot. And then with Tyrese, when he came back against UConn, once you see all those pieces come together, okay, now you can see exactly what this team is made of and, what they can be. But what happened out in the Midwest, that wasn't good. And obviously Kevin Willard in his postgame radio interview after the DePaul loss was absolutely right by saying his team didn't respect DePaul enough. And he's 100% right in saying that. And the reason why I say that is because, you have the best scorer in the conference in Javon Freeman-Liberty on the other side. David Jones. And by the way, Freeman-Liberty went out in the second half with an injury. And David Jones, being the reliable Robin to Freeman-Liberty's Batman, went off. And that was the first time we'd see David Jones look good coming out of COVID, because he missed the Big East opener against Butler. And again, it's not like this DePaul team is garbage. This was a team that was 9-1 pre-COVID, and yes, they were 0-5 in the league, but they were up 5 on Nova at halftime. They looked awful against Providence, but they almost came back and beat Butler and Hinkle. And I know Butler's not really that good, but they almost went into Carnesecca and beat St. John's there.
Again,
yeah. It seems like it happens quite often. I'm pretty sure, I think they've won, 3 in a row at Carnesecca, because they lost in the guard a couple of years ago. But they could have made it 4 in a row before, Julian Champagny did Julian Champagny things. And they hung tough on Marquette and Milwaukee before this game. So, and again, Willard was right. This team really didn't respect DePaul enough. And DePaul took it to them. They scored 52 on them in the first half. And credits, but the one thing you will expect out of Seton Hall, they do not give up. They always put up a fight. All of their losses, despite some pretty big deficits, have all come by single digits. And their biggest loss, if I'm not mistaken, I believe was by 6. So, again, granted, I know the losses haven't been good, but one thing I will say is, and what I love about this team is that they don't wave the white flag, because we've seen with certain Seton Hall teams in the past where they waved the white flag and just mentally checked out and it wasn't good.
Yeah, I think I did see in the scroll at the bottom line, Seton Hall has 5 losses at this time by a total of 19 points. So that's something they're definitely in it. But one of the more intriguing players, I think, for Seton Hall this year is Bryce Aiken. He has an intriguing story. Was the Harvard transfer? He almost came to Seton Hall straight out of college. I'm trying to remember the last time Seton Hall lost a basketball recruit to Harvard. Good old Tommy Amaker paying, I guess, some payback to his former employer. But Bryce Aiken last year, people thought he was going to make an impact. Really didn't make an impact that much because of injury, but now he's playing lights out. So how do you think Bryce Aiken has helped the Seton Hall team so far this year?
Well, I mean, Bryce Aiken being healthy was one thing, because, I mean, last year he really couldn't stay healthy. And when he was healthy, I mean, at the end of the year, I mean, he became a meme when, he was 23 for 23 at the line. And then against UConn, he goes to the line and on his first free throw, he exclaims, "I ain't never missing." And he missed the first and then clanked the second and became a meme because of that. I'm like, oh God, like, if this might be his legacy forever. And then he comes back. I'm like, do we really need him? But yeah, we really did need him.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, look at some of the performances he's put up. And I mean, came up big against Michigan. He was tremendous against Marquette. 5 for 8 from 3, and the rest of the team from 3, you know what they shot, Tom? 1 for 13. And Bryce really carried the load shooting the 3 ball. I mean, he had 28 yesterday against Marquette. And, he's given Seton Hall not just his health, but, that scoring that we saw out of him in his early days at Harvard before all those injuries. So, I mean, the fact that you get not just Bryce healthy, but the Bryce Aiken that everyone was talking about coming out of high school. I mean, this was the Bryce Aiken that they were expecting when they got him from Harvard initially. So, I mean, Bryce Aiken, I really believe that he is maybe the biggest reason why Seton Hall got off to the start that they did, and why they aren't, they're in a much better position to make an NCAA tournament compared to last year, where they were just on the outside looking in. And now that he is as big a contributor now as he is, it's going to take a lot for Seton Hall to be out of the tournament picture. I mean, granted, their Big East start has not been very good whatsoever, but if there's anyone that can will that team back up into the standings, up towards the top 5 to get a bye, it's going to be Bryce Aiken.
Yeah, I also think too, when you look at the Big East as a whole, there really are no bad losses on it. You say, DePaul beat Seton Hall, but DePaul beat Louisville, who goes and returns and loses to Pittsburgh by 15 yesterday. But it's something I think the biggest win right now for Seton Hall is Texas, because Michigan, I think right now has been the biggest disappointment in college basketball across the nation.
100%.
I think so. I don't know how that happened, but I think that win at Texas that win against Texas is going to be big. And also too, when you look at the Big East schedule, there really are no bad losses on it.
Well, Georgetown.
Georgetown maybe, but of course everyone was laughing at Georgetown last year, and they make a magical run in the Big East tournament, but also half of those players transferred out anyway. So that's something to see in line, but that's a different topic for a different podcast episode.
Sure.
But if you want to, hit that like and subscribe button so you can watch all the Battle for the Big East content on Sports Talk Line. But, since we're kind of talking about, I guess, impact players, one of the players that had, I think, the most prestige and hype from the transfer portal coming in was Kadary Richmond from Syracuse, where, he's built like an NBA player. Jim Boeheim said some unflattering things about him, and he had a monster game against UConn. But how has Kadary Richmond been for the Seton Hall Pirates so far?
So the way I kind of see Kadary is, it's kind of like, you never know what you're going to get out of him, but that when you get him at his best, this is a legitimate, potential first round NBA draft pick. I'm not going to call him a lottery guy, but he very well could be a first round pick in the NBA draft when he's at his best. And we saw his best against UConn. I mean, this was a guy, he scored 17 straight points at one point in the second half. I mean, this is a guy who I know he doesn't have the greatest 3-point shot, but, at least the threes that he takes, they're, he knows that they're open, that they're looks that he can make. It's not like he's trying to oftentimes force a 3-point shot. And when he does take threes, it's because he's got the defense on their toes because of the fact that, they expect him to drive to the cup, either dunk it or lay it in or drop it off for, somebody down low with the defense converging. So Kadary, again, when he's at his best, really, really good. And because I'm an hour away from Syracuse, I watched a lot of Syracuse last year. Kadary Richmond was a better point guard than Joe Girard. And I say that with the utmost confidence because Joe Girard, he's a good shooter, but defensively can't bring what Kadary Richmond does to the table. And honestly, what Kadary brings to the table with this Seton Hall team, they pride themselves on defense. Granted, they haven't been very good defensively over the last few games, but Kadary on defense does such a good job just getting his hands in the passing lanes, disrupting dribble drives. He's doing all of these things that, to me, they don't show up on the stat sheet. I mean, they might show up in steals, but by disrupting the other team's offense and then also, just facilitating the offense and making sure that it runs smoothly. And not to mention the combo in the backcourt of Kadary and Bryce. I mean, the plus minus shows that it's really good together. And, they proved it to be a pretty dynamic duo when they're out there on the court together. And, it's like a yin and yang. Bryce has the outside game and the quickness, and Kadary, he's quick too, but, he's more stealthy and getting in the lane and, carving up defenses and also, setting up Bryce for 3-point shots where he excels.
Yeah, I think too, you do make a good point. Bryce Aikens and Kadary Richmond, they do complement each other where, one's definitely more, if you have an open three, you want Bryce Aiken taking it. If you need someone slashing to the basket, you'd probably go with Kadary Richmond. But I think those are the two most interesting players so far. But who do you see on the Seton Hall roster is their X factor where for them to get a win or make a big run this season needs to step up and deliver?
Well, I mean, not that so I'll tell you who has stepped up and who needs to step up.
Okay.
The guy who has stepped up and has been, people were giving him a lot of crap for no reason early in the year. But I love Alexis Yetna. I mean, this is a guy against Marquette, 15 points, 16 rebounds off the bench. And he replaced Trey Jackson, who mentally just looked out of it. He committed a stupid flagrant one foul where he yanked the back of a Marquette player's jersey. And Willard, I don't know why one of my friends doesn't like Willard because he doesn't, quote unquote, hold his players accountable when they do stupid stuff like this. But he did. He punished Trey Jackson for not having his head in the game and committing a stupid flagrant one foul on Marquette. And he rewards Alexis Yetna, who 15 and 16, and those 16 of those 47 rebounds, and Seton Hall almost doubled up Marquette on the glass. And Yetna, again, for his rebounding prowess, during the preseason, a lot of people were equating his rebounding skills to that of Angel Delgado, and that's a pretty damn good comparison to make because Angel's the all-time leading rebounder in the history of the conference. So, and Yetna's got an outside shot, which is, it's coming along, and he hit the only other three for Seton Hall yesterday. Aiken hit 5 threes. Yetna hit the only other one in a rather weak 6 for 21 showing. But in speaking of 3-point shooting, this is where I transition into who needs to step up. Jameer Harris. I mean, early on in the year, Jameer looked really, really good. I mean, he was sniping from 3-point range. But since maybe the Texas or Rutgers game, I mean, the dude's been non-existent. I mean, and part of it, I think, is because Kevin Willard, I think because he is a little stubborn in his ways. I'm not going to sit here and say Kevin Willard's the perfect coach because he has his flaws. But Willard being stubborn at times, he's not giving Jameer Harris ample opportunities to get him in the game, and Seton Hall needs good 3-point shooting. And Jameer Harris, is their best three-point shooter, even better than Bryce Aiken at times. And what they need to do with Jameer Harris, not just getting him, I'm not expecting to give him 20 plus minutes, but when he's in the game for 10 to 15 minutes, they got to run sets for him where they can have him come off a curl and get good open 3-point shots, because more often than not, when they're open, Jameer Harris is going to knock those down.
Yes. And I think too, 3-point shooting, it's so pivotal in the game of basketball at any level right now. You need to hit those outside shots, or you're very easy to guard. You can just pack the paint against Seton Hall or any other team. But I think too, I guess trying to look forward as much as we can right now in this unique time where you never know when a game's going to be canceled an hour before game time because COVID reared its ugly head again. But what do you think would be the biggest challenge for Seton Hall going forward? You might have touched on it a little bit, but can you think of anything else besides 3-point shooting that could be a big challenge for Seton Hall going forward?
So yeah, that's a good question. And when we talk about the 3-point shooting, I mean, so many teams in this conference shoot the three ball very, very well. I mean, Villanova obviously is the first program that comes to mind. Marquette's become a really good 3-point shooting team. Xavier usually is always a good 3-point shooting team. I mean, they got Adam Kunkel for crying out loud. And then obviously Creighton probably, I mean, if Villanova's not the first, then it's Creighton that you think of that shoots the three ball well. And they don't get until early February. And I think, if we're looking ahead in terms of, things they got to do in order to, really, get back into the swing of things, well, the back-to-back against St. John's is big, because if they could steal both legs, my expectation is that I don't think they'll win both, because it's awfully tough to beat a team twice in 3 days. But going to the Garden obviously provides a better chance for Seton Hall to win. But if Seton Hall can win, and 3 games in 5 days, mind you, where they go to the Garden on Saturday, the 22nd, and then they host St. John's at Walsh on the 24th in the first Big East game in that building since Chris Mullen and company was there in 1985, which is wild, but but I think it's fun. It's fun. And then they get Marquette a couple nights later at Prudential Center. If they got to win 2 out of 3, no matter what. But if they go 3-0, they'll be in really good hands. But I think the biggest 3-game stretch of the season will be home against Xavier, at Nova, and at UConn. Those are arguably the 3 games against the 3 best teams, arguably, in the Big East. I mean, Villanova and Xavier to me are 1 and 2, because Xavier's only 2 losses in the conference were against Villanova. So, and Xavier has won now 3 in a row at Prudential Center. And the Pirates, I think they got to reclaim their home court in that game, because you want to, of that 3-game stretch, you got to win the first one. And going to Nova, I mean, they're lucky they're not playing that game at the Finn, because I said it before on the Igloo, nobody in the Big East wins at the Finn. The last team to do that was before the renovation. It was Butler back in 2017, which is absolutely bonkers. And winning at Gamble is not going to be easy either when they go to UConn. So if you can find a way to steal one of those games, you got to have really, I mean, Michigan is no longer a good win. Texas, the value in that win is kind of deteriorating, because I think they're going to fall out of the top 25. They were 21. They lost to Iowa State in their most recent game. So they got to find wins against, legitimately good ranked teams. If they can find a way to sweep either Xavier or UConn, that would be huge for them to avoid having to be, between the 7 and 10 range. Well, worse than a 6 seed, I should say, because if they can get a top 6 seed in the NCAA tournament, they will be in good hands, because if you're a 7 or an 8, you're going to get a 1 or 2 seed in the second round in all likelihood. So the goal is, if you're Seton Hall, find a way to steal a sweep. They're already halfway there against UConn. Yeah. But again, it's easier said than done. But again, they really need to get a signature. I mean, UConn might be a signature win if UConn plays well and it drastically improves. But they got to find a way to. I mean, if they steal one at Wells Fargo, given how hot Nova is right now, that will probably be the win. But again, they got to, get top 5 in the Big East for sure, and then get 1 to 2, maybe even 3 big time wins from here on out against, Xavier, UConn, Nova, and if they reschedule Providence, you got to beat them at the Rock or in Walsh, wherever they end up having the game, if they do reschedule.
Yeah, it's definitely, you bring up a good point. I think rescheduling is going to be a challenge, to say the least, going forward. And, could some teams duck some other teams? I think that can happen. There are some questionable shutdowns, I think, last year for certain programs in the Big East. But I think, you hit it right on the head. I think you also need to get those road wins. Road wins are going to be key. And this is something where, it's going to be tough. This is probably the most balanced and deepest the Big East has been since realignment. There's a lot of games where if your team loses, you're not that upset because it's not a bad loss. There are very few bad losses in the conference, but it's going to be a battle going forward in the Big East, and I hope everyone checks in every week to catch us. Tim, before we leave, can we tell us where you can find us on social media?
Absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at The Real Timmy Ice. My podcast, The Igloo, comes out every Monday and Friday, and you can catch that on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. But I know Apple Podcasts tends to be the usual way because it seems like the majority of people on this planet are usually on Team Apple, and Apple Podcasts is very accessible. So I would recommend Apple Podcasts, but if not, anywhere you get your podcast, most likely you'll find The Igloo. And then, you can find me on Twitter Spaces. I'll try to go on there time to time, and I'm not. I trust me, I'm a Seton Hall alum, but I pride myself as a Big East guy more than anything, and I always love talking Big East basketball on The Igloo, in Spaces, everywhere. And then, obviously, if you catch me on the streets some way, especially come March, I'm trying to cover both the women's and men's Big East tournaments. I'll be, hopefully, I think more likely than not, I'll probably be in Connecticut for the women's tournament. Fingers crossed I'll get an in-person credential for the men, because I know I was in person for media day back in October in the Garden. So, but again, just to reiterate for anyone that did miss it, Instagram and Twitter at The Real Timmy Ice and The Igloo Podcast, anywhere you get your podcast.
All right. Thank you, Timmy. Thanks for coming on. And remember, listen like you play with intensity.